Russian President Vladimir Putin hosted Syrian Interim President Ahmad Al-Sharaa at the Kremlin for the first time on Wednesday. According to Associated Press Al-Sharaa led a swift rebel offensive last year that ousted former Syrian President Bashar Assad despite years of Moscow's support. The meeting underlines Russia's desire to establish working ties with Syria's new leadership and secure its military foothold in the country. Putin said ties between the two countries have never been connected to the political situation, but instead guided by the interests of the Syrian people. Assad was an ally of Russia, and Moscow's scorched-earth intervention in support of him a decade ago turned the tide of Syria's civil war, keeping him in his seat until his swift removal in December. Russia, which has focused on the fighting in Ukraine and kept only a small military contingent in Syria, didn't try to counter the rebel offensive but offered asylum to Assad after he fled the country. Syrian state news agency Sana reported that Al-Sharaa and Putin will discuss regional and international developments of mutual interest and explore ways to develop cooperation to serve the common interests of both countries. Despite having been on opposite sides of the battle lines during the civil war, the new rulers in Damascus have taken a pragmatic approach to relations with Moscow. Russia has retained a presence at its air and naval bases on the Syrian coast, and the Kremlin has voiced hope for negotiating a deal to keep the outposts. Moscow has also reportedly sent oil shipments to Syria. A Russian delegation visited Damascus in January, and Syria's Foreign Minister Asad al-Shibani visited Moscow in July.
Уважаемый господин президент, уважаемые коллеги, мы очень рады вас приветствовать в Москве. В России никогда в отношении Сирии не было никаких каких-то отношений, связанных с нашей политической конъюнктурой или с особыми интересами. Мы всегда руководствовались на протяжении всех этих десятилетий одним – интересами сирийского народа.
تربط ما بين سوريا وروسيا واليوم نحن في سوريا الجديدة حاولنا أن نعرف عن سوريا الجديدة من خلال كل دول العالم إنتاج الروسي وأيضا كثير من محطات الطاقة معتمدة على الخبرات الروسية وكثير من العلاقات الاستراتيجية والسياسية سواء دولية أو إقليمية.
Ukraine has been systematically targeting Russian oil refineries with long-range drones, causing significant disruptions in fuel supplies and stress in the daily lives of Russians, although these attacks have not yet destabilized the military situation on the front. According to journalists at the New York Times, the drone campaign combines tactical impact with psychological pressure on the Kremlin and serves as a signal to international partners of Kiev's resolve. According to the publication, Ukrainian units have learned to send long-range drones deep into Russian territory, targeting oil refining facilities specifically. The idea is not only to disrupt logistics, but also to exert economic and political pressure on the Moscow government, while ground successes are limited. In fields far from the front, fighters prepare aircraft with a wingspan of up to 7 meters and payloads of up to 50 kilograms. Checks and launches most often occur at night. The unit commander, known by the call sign Casper, says frankly that after a night mission, reports of factory fires appear in the morning. This is precisely the kind of impact the team strives for. Since August, support groups have been deploying long-range drones almost daily to strike critical Russian refining infrastructure. The goal of these operations is to inflict damage that sanctions and other international measures have so far failed to achieve. Shutting down and disabling production lines that directly impact the availability of gasoline and diesel fuel to the population. President Volodymyr Zelenski directly called the oil refinery fires a quick sanction, emphasizing that such strikes have an immediate impact on Russia's domestic fuel market. NYT journalists were granted rare access to one of the long-range drone battalions. but for security reasons, they were not permitted to disclose the exact coordinates, number of drones, or personnel involved. While analysts aren't calling this campaign radical, they point to a significant domestic and economic impact. According to Wood Mackenzie estimates, by recently, Ukraine has disabled or damaged equipment equivalent to nearly 1.5 million barrels of refining capacity per day, approximately 20% of Russia's refining capacity. These damages have already caused gasoline shortages in several regions and artificially accelerated price increases by approximately 40% since the beginning of the year. In response, gas stations are imposing sales limits, and in some areas, gasoline sales have been temporarily suspended. Russian media have reported queues at gas stations and reports of gasoline shortages in Crimea. Russia's strategy of targeting Ukraine's energy infrastructure, from power plants to transmission lines, was aimed at putting pressure on civilian life within the country. Ukraine's response, however, is attempting to avoid indiscriminate destruction of civilian infrastructure in Russia and is focusing on facilities directly linked to war financing and domestic services. This selective tactic is also used to maintain moral legitimacy in Western capitals and reduce the risk of escalation. Economist Vladislav Inozemtsev points out the technical vulnerability of oil refineries due to the presence of flammable substances. Even a single successful strike can cause long-lasting fires, and repairing complex technological equipment is complicated by sanctions on the import of spare parts and components from the US and EU. In practice, this means that repairs to oil refineries can take much longer than the restoration of individual military facilities. At the same time, Ukraine's drone program has expanded significantly in recent years, from small strike vehicles on the battlefield to systems capable of traveling hundreds of kilometers deep into enemy territory. The Casper team itself transitioned from using imported models in 2022 to employing its own modifications. The current arsenal includes production models developed in Ukraine after the start of the full-scale invasion. The unit, which initially consisted of about 40 people and 10 vehicles, has now grown into a regiment. The Ukrainian military estimates its potential strength to be within the typical regimental strength. The challenge for scaling up remains not so much production capacity as funding. Factories and workshops can produce more vehicles, but significant investment is needed to accelerate production by hundreds of thousands of units.